All right, well, the topic is marriage. And right off the top, I want to ask the question of those who are married, how long have you been married? Yes, Miss Linda.
Can I do the building now?
No, this is for you. This is for you. Yes, it is. Can you be a help to other people? Can you pass on wisdom to young ladies? This is for you. So those that are married, how long have you been married? Dan, Shirley Ann? You had to ask her? Wow. Be here the next 4 weeks, brother. I only have a half hour here. So.
Dan,
28. Anyone else want to? I'm not going to just pass to you. 45? 45. 55. Bet it feels a lot longer, doesn't it, Mrs. Rush? Wayne?
Somewhere 53.
Somewhere 53. 53. Do we have any higher than 55? No? That's the longest life sentence so far is Penny's 55. All right, well, over the next 4 weeks, as I say, we're going to look at the topic of marriage. And this week, we want to look just at the principles, just an introduction of what marriage is and why it is and what God's purpose is in it. Next week is preparation for marriage. And although some of us obviously are married, you know, we aren't preparing for marriage. But like I said to Miss Linda, there's different people in our lives. I'm going to have kids that are about to enter that stage of marriage, or some of us may have grandkids, or we have friends that we can still pass on godly advice. And then in week 3, we'll look at the preservation of marriage and how to preserve a strong marriage. And then in the final week, we want to look at the perversion of marriage and basically how the world has perverted this concept of marriage. And what I want us to focus on really is just the importance of what God intends marriage to be. This isn't heading down that hot button topic of divorce. I don't plan to get down there. Will that word get mentioned? Yes, but I'm not looking at that. What I want to look at is just strengthening marriages, preparing marriages, and helping to teach the next generation. And I also want to start off by saying I am not an expert. We just celebrated our 20th year, Amanda and I, so that does not make me an expert, I know that. I don't have 55 years of experience. But at the same time, I still think that God's using this to teach me as well. And I want to share that with you. And some of these precepts, concepts, the things that God shows us in His Word are things that Amanda and I strive to learn, to grow in. And I just want to share those things with you. So I think that this can be a benefit to someone that's been married for 2 years or for 60 years, and I hope that's the case. So if we're going to study a topic, best place to start is in the beginning. So let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26. And I'll read verses 26 to 28. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over cattle, and over all the earth, and over the creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." So first, right off the bat, we see God created man and women. So I'll open it up. What are some of the reasons that God created us? Why did God create us? Deborah? For His pleasure. Yeah, for His pleasure. Any other thoughts? Now, obviously, we know that it's for His pleasure, but there's plenty of reasons why God created us. Ian?
Well, ultimately, in the end, we are presented to Him as the bride.
Right.
He created us to be His bride.
To be His bride, yeah. Anyone else? Well, I wrote down for His pleasure, for His purpose, like you're saying there, Ian, to glorify and praise Him, you know. What good is it being God and being that great if there's no one to praise and worship that greatness? For Him to love. God is love. Well, who's He going to love if there's no one to love? He created us for that purpose. He created us for us to love him, but to do it with our own free will, that we would choose to do that. Not that he forced us to love him, but that we would choose to do it. And also to serve him as well. And I'm sure there's others, but those were just some of the ones I wrote down. And in verse 28, we see he gave them a purpose. It says, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion over all the animals. And we need to remember, though, even in our purpose and all these things he's told us to do, that he's still the one forming each one in the womb. That's his job. He's the creator of all, just like he told Jeremiah, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. He's the creator. We just get to be a part of that process, and it's a great experience being a parent. And that's part of the purpose of being a husband and wife. And it's incredible that he allows us to be a part of that purpose. That, he could have just created Adam, created Eve, and created every other person the same way he created Adam. He could have done that, but he allows us to be a part of that great process and the blessings that come with it. Now, I know not every couple is able to have children. I know people that have tried and just can't. But my heart breaks for the people that have chosen not to have children because it ruins their lifestyle. And I know people like that, like going to Parkview, the retirement home, and you meet people that they have nobody in their lives because, maybe, and I'm not trying to judge them, maybe they were in a case where they couldn't have children. But I knew people growing up when I lived back in Picton that didn't have kids, and as they got older, it was sad to watch because they had no one. And thankfully, they had some friends to help them out. But it's very lonely in your later years when you don't have children. Children are a blessing, and that's why verse 28 starts out with, and God blessed them, right before he gives them all their purpose. This is a great blessing to have this opportunity. And we also know that God wants man and woman to become one before they reproduce. Let's look at Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18. And the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet. Now, in the prison system, sometimes they'll use what's called solitary confinement. And really, it's torture more than it's any sort of rehabilitation. It's tough. It's cruel. And just being confined is bad enough, being in that space. But it's being on your own and having no physical interaction with another person that drives the person crazy. It hurts your mind. It hurts your body. Because it's not being physically stimulated, whether it's conversation or touch or any of those things, it drives a person crazy. And that's just like Adam. No matter how great any of these animals were that's listed in the verses, none of them were good enough to be a helpmeet to Adam. There's no pet that is going to replace your spouse. And I know some people that love their pets more than their spouses, and it ought not be there, not be that way. But nonetheless, we need that human interaction. Now, does that mean it's wrong to be unmarried? Well, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 8, this is Paul speaking. He says, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. Paul says to the unmarried and the widows, he says, if you can abide, which is to endure or sustain, just like he does, then it's okay to do that. But in verse 9 he says, but if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. And Paul's saying, that says, if you can't abide, then you're better off to get married. You're going to have these needs, you're better off to just go and get married. So for some people, God set it up where they may never have a spouse, and they're able to abide in that. They're able to sustain through that. But for the majority of us, I think we have that desire, we have that need to have a spouse. And I know as a young man, that was my desire. I wanted to find a wife. I wanted to start a family, which a lot of my friends at that age, when I was a teenager, they weren't thinking that, but that was just my desire. That's what I had in my heart, to have a spouse. And it's because, I knew it wasn't good to be alone. And maybe it's because I was an only child. Maybe that was part of it. I don't know, that I had that desire for a spouse. But nonetheless, God knows that it's not good for man to be alone and that he needs a help meet. Look at verse 18 again. It says, "And the Lord said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an helpmeet for him." Now this term helpmeet, this isn't just a helper or an assistant. This isn't like having a maid or hired help. There's some men that treat it that way, and it shouldn't be that way either. But the word meet, it's a coming together. Just like if you've got two people, they're in different locations, and they meet up. Let's meet at Tim Hortons. We meet. We come together. But it's more than that. It's more than that. Now, who would agree that men and women are different? One hand, two hands, three hands. Okay, let's be honest here. What are some of the differences between men and women? Deborah.
Women are more nurturing, they're more made to, to be compassionate, to kind of keep the family.
Yeah, nurturing, compassionate, family-oriented. Any other differences? You're all too afraid? Hey, your wife's not here. You can say whatever you want. Ian?
Well, this backs up their desire, and in fact, instinct to be nurturing, is they're more emotional, their decisions are more emotionally suspended, and for that reason, to make them nurturing, I guess.
Yeah, no, men, Wayne?
Men are more goal-oriented.
Yeah, very goal-oriented, and we like a pat on the back when we accomplish those goals, whereas, for ladies, it's more compliments or caring about what they've done and seeing it in a different way, and that's some of the differences, yeah. Any others? Walter? Women want security, yeah, for sure. They definitely do, whereas, and, that's part of the man's job as well, to be the head, and I know for sure the wives like that security of their husband, not backing down and there to protect them. Wayne?
Women multitask better than men.
Yes. Women definitely multitask better than men. I'm like a one, maybe two project person. Beyond that, I actually had that conversation with Amanda last week. Like, you're a great multitasker. I am not. One track mind. Men are very physical, That's the way God created us. That's looked down on society. Well, they're like animals. Well, God created that desire, obviously for part of the purpose of reproduction, but, men are very visual, whereas women are more in with words and things like that, or how they're treated, whereas men are more on the physical side. Well, in the term help meet, God sees those differences. And all those differences are what He made. He made the differences. These aren't, something we came up with. And He wants all those differences. You got all the men and all their differences, and the women all their differences. And He wants us to meet, to come together and be one. And they're to complement each other, those differences, to complement when we meet. So that meet is a coming together, and that meet is to fit aptly. And that's not just coming together in a union and joining. That word aptly means to do it properly or justly, or do it by God's design. Now, I've heard this a lot of times. I think I've probably heard it preached before. I don't think necessarily here, but I've heard this preached before that, the wife makes up for the shortcomings of the man, and the man makes up for the shortcomings of the woman. Well, in saying that, then you're saying God didn't create them the way He designed them. You're saying God made them flawed. Our flaw is our sin and our own choices that we make, but no, God made us all differently to come together so that when we do come together, it's that meet, that perfect union to fit aptly. Wives, your husband was created differently on purpose. Now, there's some things he chooses to do or chooses to say that are inappropriate or wrong or that might drive you nuts, but your husband was made with a purpose. And for us husbands, we need to remember the same thing, that our wives were made differently for a reason. And those are things that, as we look at our spouses, we need to appreciate those differences, because they really do, for the men, it fills in our gaps where, we aren't as caring, we aren't as nurturing. They're good things. We need to stop looking at them as, I don't get this, and I don't understand it. And that reminds me of it's a joke that I read recently. It made me laugh, but it said, men don't try to understand women. Women understand women and they hate each other. I thought, well, you know what? In the world, I wouldn't say that in the church family, but in the world, there's a lot of women that they can't get along, whereas men seem to have an easier time of getting along. But a helpmeet is a meshing together of all those qualities that are needed for each person as they join in that one flesh. And Adam needed this. So what did God do? Look at verses 21 to 23 in chapter 2. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bone, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. God took from Adam, and he created Eve. He could have just, like I said earlier, he could have just made Eve the same way he made Adam, but he didn't. He took her from him. He took her from him. Woman came from men, flesh of his flesh, as it says. And that's why husbands, we're told to love our wives as we love ourselves, as it says in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 28 to 29. I'll read it for you. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. You know, we wouldn't let ourselves starve. Well, I'm not very good at cooking, so I might let myself starve. I wouldn't eat well, but we wouldn't let ourselves starve. We don't let ourselves intentionally get injured. We protect ourselves. And we always understand ourselves. We always understand our point of view, right? So we always take care of ourselves, and we have that love for ourselves. We might not, in our humility, we don't want to say we love ourselves, but we do enough to protect ourselves, to understand ourselves, and do all of those things. But, we need to have that same love for our spouse, just like we would love ourselves. That we would protect ourselves, that we would nourish ourselves, that we would understand ourselves. We need to do that with our spouse. We need to understand them, to take the time to understand what they're going through, not just, well, I know what I think. No, we need to have that same love that we have for ourselves, for our spouse. And that's the principle we see in Genesis 2:24. Look at verse 24. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. One flesh. And the man and the woman, they came from the same flesh, and when they're married, they return to that same state. That's God's design. It's God's design. Now in this verse, we see two things happening. What are the two things? What are the two things that happen in verse 24? Wayne? Leave and cleave, exactly. There's a leaving and there's a cleaving. So first, the leaving. When a person gets married, they're supposed to leave their parents. Children, they're made by God. And for the parents, our job is to train and nurture them. But they're not a part of that one flesh. Did they come from it? Yes. But they're not a part of that relationship. That's a different bond that we have with our kids. So when the Bible says a person is to leave their father and mother, it's telling you two different things. The first is that the child needs to leave the dependency and the rule of their parents and now submit themselves to their spouse. So that's part of the leaving. They're to become a one flesh with their own spouse and replicate what's just happened with their parents. But that also tells us, and this is a hard one for me because I'm approaching this stage of my life, it tells us that parents are to let them go. We have to let them go. As hard as that's going to be, I know that's going to rip my heart out. But we have to let them go. And that's not to say that we stop loving them or stop caring for them or stop giving them godly advice. But we have to let them go. That's going to be a hard thing to do. And sadly, in some families, parents don't want to let go. And they meddle in their kids' lives. And that's not good. That's not healthy for their marriage. It's not healthy for your own. Because there's also situations where one spouse cares for the children more than they care for their own spouse, and that's wrong as well. They step out of that one flesh. So we have to let them leave. We have to let them leave. Now, secondly, there's a cleaving. And when a person enters into marriage with someone, they cleave to their new spouse. Now that word cleave means to unite aptly, or to fit, which is just, it's not just uniting, it's doing it properly. And there's an effort needed to cleave. To cleave, you need to do it properly. And we don't, and this is how the world kind of looks at it. We don't just get together and unite. We do it in God's design. Not how we think we should do it, because that's how we get into our messes. But cleave, funny enough, also has another meaning. Think about when you use a cleaver. What does it do? It divides and splits, So in one term, cleave means to unite, and then the other term, it means to divide and to split. Well, that needs to happen too as parents. As our children cleave to their new spouse, there needs to be a cutting off of that dependency. And again, it's not that the child has to stop talking to their parents or getting godly wisdom. I still could go to, and I know Amanda does, go to her parents for godly advice, and that should still happen. But that dependency has to now go within that relationship. A marriage where mom and dad are still parenting as though the child is under their care is just a recipe for disaster. It really is. Now, each person that enters the marriage should be replicating that same one flesh. Just like the parents, now they get a chance to replicate that, replenish it, and move on in their own one flesh and so on. So the question is, then, why did God design it this way? Well, let's go to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, and I'll read verses 2 to 8. And the Pharisees came to him and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife?" tempting him. And this is the Pharisees talking to Jesus. And he answered and said unto them, "What did Moses command you?" And they said, "Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away." And Jesus answered and said unto them, "For the hardness of your heart he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh." Now this passage touches on divorce, but I think what it's really doing here is showing God's intent for marriage instead of our own. Jesus tells the Pharisees that because of the hardness of your hearts, that Moses wrote you this bill of divorcement. The question shouldn't be, is it okay to set aside your spouse, set her aside in divorce? The question should be, how did we get to this point of even wanting this divorce? And the answer to that, he says, is a hard heart. This came from having a hard heart. So I'll ask the question, when we have a hard heart, what don't we have in our lives? I'll open that up. What don't we have when we have a hard heart in our lives? What things in us, what traits in us don't we have? What are we shutting down when we have a hard heart? Walter? Forgiveness. That's a good one. Laura? Not being very Christ-like, yeah. Martina? Compassion, yeah. Dwayne? Caring, yeah. Martha? True love, yeah. Yes. Not seeking Christ, yeah. You're seeking yourself because you think you're right. You've got a hard heart. Ian?
Not being thankful, gratefulness and thankfulness.
Right.
A lot of that.
Yeah, not being thankful. There's a lot of things that we don't have when we have a hard heart. I wrote down, some of you already said this, love, compassion, forgiveness, joy. We don't have joy. We might have some happiness, brief stints of that in our own, creating our own happiness, but we don't have joy. We don't have peace, that's for sure. Patience, we don't have understanding. Because when we have a hard heart, well, we're right. They're not. We've lost that understanding. And the two other big ones, we don't have any grace or mercy at all. The two things that God gives to us every day. We don't have that towards anyone because of our hard heart. All these things are qualities of who? Qualities of God. That's where we get them from, is from Him. And when we have a hard heart in our marriage, we're not living by God's design. If we don't have that right, then our marriage can't be right. The other thing about a hard heart is it doesn't happen overnight, usually. There might be a rare instance where someone gets up in the morning and there was something big in it. That's it, I want out of here. But for the most part, especially in a marriage, a hard heart does not start overnight. It starts with one unresolved issue. And it builds, and it builds, and it builds. And you start losing the love, the compassion, the forgiveness. You start losing the understanding and that mercy and grace until you get to that point of, well, there's no other choice but divorce. Or some people will just live in misery because, they don't want to get divorced, but we're going to live in misery for the rest of our lives. That's not right either. That's not right either. And Jesus knew this. And He says it's your heart attitude. Look at verse 6. He says, but from the beginning. Back in verse 5, He says, for the hardness of your heart He wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. He says it's your heart attitude. This is how you treat marriage. But from the beginning, this isn't how it was. It was built on love, compassion, forgiveness, joy, peace, patience, understanding, grace, mercy, all those things that we've talked about. And they're done to be shared one with another in our marriage, to encourage one another, to build that strong relationship, to set an example for our children as well so that they can carry that on. Because marriage, it's all about being fruitful, and it's about multiplying, and it's about replenishing the earth, but it's bigger than that. Because with it should be a fruitful multiplying and replenishing of God's love for one another. And in some families that gets broken. And that's why it seems in families where there's a divorce, it carries on generation after generation because it's been broken. That God's love is not there. That pattern of godly love should multiply from family to family, to generation. It's a hardness of people's hearts, though, that break the design of marriage. In verse 7, it says, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. For the cause of God's real design. That design of leaving his parents and cleaving to his wife. That's the proper cause, not your cause. Your cause of that hard heart and those things that you won't understand, you won't love, you won't forgive. All of those things. Do it in God's cause. The world today lives by all these false ideas. I'm right, you're wrong, and it's time to move on. Man's cause leads to a hardness of heart. Man's cause leads to divorce. But God's cause creates something amazing. Look at verse 8. And they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. It's hard to understand, really. Because we're people. We're sinners. We think about ourselves a lot, right? But we should be able to get to a point, if we have all these things, that design of love and compassion and caring and understanding about our spouse, we should get to that point of feeling that we're that tight. We're that tight. They're our help meet. We've met in the middle. We've come together, and we're that strong union. That's an amazing thing when we do it in God's design, instead of with that hard heart. The world's turned marriage into a meaningless union between two people. But when we look at God's design, it's truly incredible. His design brings two people together as one to help, to encourage, to strengthen one another with His love, not our own, with His compassion, not ours, with His forgiveness. It takes God to forgive. That's one of the hardest things to do, is to forgive. It takes God to have that joy, that peace, the patience, the understanding, the grace, and the mercy. So if you and your spouse have a strong marriage, then praise God for it. And I make sure every morning I don't forget that, because I know it's not of me, it's not of how wonderful my wife is. the only thing that has us in a strong marriage is the fact that we're both seeking God. And when there's a struggle, we turn to Him. You know, what was my fault in this, Lord? Search me. And that always brings us back together if we have our focus on God. And if you're in a marriage that has some struggles, then consider God's design. It's so easy to get a hard heart. It's so easy to not have forgiveness and not have understanding and just think about our side of the situation. Just think about God's design. Don't get to that place of a hard heart. Because that old illustration is true. And I just kind of mapped that out. But if you've got the husband and the wife, and it's the corny triangle thing that every pastor and preacher's ever mentioned, but you got the husband and wife, and they're here together. And if they're focused on God, and you have those issues and those struggles, and your heart is, God, I want your love, I want your compassion, I want your understanding, I want to have your grace and mercy in this, and you're seeking Him, it always brings you together. Always. And it's what's our heart, and who's our focus? Is it ourselves? Are we focused on our spouse and what they're doing wrong, or are we focused on God and His design? And next week, like I say, we'll look at preparation for marriage. And again, that can be a benefit if we're already married. We all know somebody that's going to be married shortly, and they need godly advice. Praise God, I got godly advice when I first entered into marriage. One of the things that's always stuck in my mind, I don't remember what you said or if there was a passage, Pastor Taylor, but he made this comment that don't ever badmouth your wife or don't talk down about her around anyone. And because that's having a hard heart. And that's letting other people see it. And that was huge for me. Or Pastor Uren preaching in Amos, and that's kind of what got me going on here. I was reading in Amos 3:3, can two walk together except they be agreed? That principle, I know that's not talking about marriage, it's not. But that principle's still from God. And you can't walk together unless you're agreed. Important truths, and we're going to look at that in the coming weeks. So I pray it's been a benefit. Let's pray.